Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on Instagram @Snoozecast to find behind-the-scenes content. If you enjoy our show, please write a review on the Apple Podcasts app. Here's a recent review we loved. The subject line is, "Works better than music," and it goes, "I find that soothing music or nature sounds are not enough to get me out of my head. I'm still thinking, planning, and worrying. I like this podcast because the stories have enough of a plot to engage me, but the voices are soothing enough to put me to sleep." And thank you to our listener who wrote this review. We're so glad to help you fall asleep. This episode is brought to you by Colorful Ribbons. Tonight, we'll read the fairy tale Cinderella, taken from the old French tale by Charles Perrault, originally published in 1697. This version has also been lightly adapted by Snoozecast. Cinderella, also known as the Little Glass Slipper, is a folk tale about the triumphant reward of a persecuted heroine. Thousands of variants are known throughout the world since ancient times. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. Once upon a time, there lived a gentleman who married twice. His second wife was a widow with 2 grown-up daughters, and this woman would have been the proudest and most overbearing in the world had not her daughters exactly resembled her with their fine airs and insolent tempers. The husband, too, had by his first wife a child of his own, a young daughter, and so good and so gentle that she promised to grow up in the living image of her mother, who had been the most lovable of women. The wedding festivities were no sooner over than the stepmother began to show herself in her true colors. She could not endure the girl's good qualities, which by contrast rendered her own daughters the more odious. She put her to drudge at the meanest household work, and thus she and her precious darlings not only wreaked their spite, but saved money to buy themselves dresses and finery. It was the child who scoured the pots and pans, scrubbed the floors, washed down the stairs, polished the tables, ironed the linen, darned the stockings, and made the beds. She herself slept at the top of the house in an attic, upon a wretched straw mattress, while her sisters had apartments of their own, with inlaid floors, beds carved and gilded in the latest fashion, and mirrors in which they could see themselves from head to foot. Yet they were so helpless, or rather they thought it so menial to do anything for themselves, that they but had not to tie a ribbon, or a bow to adjust, or a bodice to be laced, and the girl must have been sent for. When she came, it was odd that they met her with a storm of abuse, and it was in this fashion. "What do you mean, pray, by answering the bell in this state? Come stand before the glass and look at yourself. Look at your hands. Ugh! How can you suppose we should allow you to touch a ribbon or even come near us with such dirty hands?" "How can I help it?" thought the poor little drudge. "If I do not run at once when the bell rings, they scold me for that." She kept these thoughts to herself, however, and suffered her ill usage patiently, not daring to complain to her father. When she had done her work, she used to creep away to the chimney corner and seat herself among the cinders, and from this the household name for her came to be Cinderella. They were wise in their way to deprive her of a looking-glass, for in truth, and in spite of her sorry rags, Cinderella was 100 times more beautiful than they with all their magnificent dresses. It happened that the king's son gave a ball and sent invitations through the kingdom to every person of quality. Our two misses were invited among the rest, for they cut a great figure in that part of the country. Mightily pleased they were, to be sure, with their cards of invitation, all printed in gold and stamped with the broad red seal of the heir apparent. And mightily busy they were, discussing what gowns and headdresses would best become them. This meant more worry for Cinderella, for it was she who ironed her sisters' linen, pleated their wristbands, pressed their trimmings of old lace, and wrapped them away in tissue paper. They could talk of nothing but their ball dresses. "For my part," said the elder, "I shall wear a velvet crimson dress. I had thought of cloth of gold, but there's the cost of the underskirt to be considered, and underskirts seem to grow dearer and dearer in these days." "I," said the younger, "must make shift with my old underskirt, that is, unless I can wheedle some money out of Papa." For so, in their affection, they called their stepfather. "I don't pretend that I like wearing an old underskirt, and I hope to make dear Papa sensible of this. But against it I shall have the gold-flowered robe, on which I am determined." "And I, of course," said the elder, "must wear my diamond spray, if only it had a ruby in the clasp instead of a sapphire. I suppose there is no time now to ask the jeweler to reset it with a ruby." "But you don't possess a ruby, dear," murmured her sister, who did possess one and had no intention of lending it. "And besides, sapphires suit you so much better." They sent for the best hairdresser to arrange their hair. From time to time, they called up Cinderella to ask her advice, for she had excellent taste. Cinderella advised them perfectly, and even offered her services to dress their hair for them on the night of the ball. They accepted gladly enough. While she was dressing them, one asked her, "Cinderella, would you not like to be going to the ball?" "Alas, miss," said Cinderella, "you're making fun of me. It's not for the like of me to be there." "You're right, girl. Folks would laugh indeed to see Cinderella at the ball." Anyone but Cinderella might have pushed in the pins to hold their bonnets in place just a trifle carelessly. But she had no malice in her nature. She attired them to perfection, though they found fault with her all the while it was doing, and quite forgot to thank her when it was done. But at length the coach arrived at the door. Cinderella turned away weeping back to the house, and crept into her dear chimney corner, where, being all alone in the kitchen, she could indulge her misery. A long while she sat there. Suddenly Between two heavy sobs, she looked up, her eyes attracted by a strange blue glow on the far side of the hearth. And there stood the strangest lady, who must have entered somehow without knocking. Her powdered hair was dressed all about her head in the prettiest of short curls, amid which the most exquisite jewels, diamonds and rubies and emeralds, sparkled against the firelight. Her dress had a skirt of lace flounces, billowy and delicate as sea foam, and a stiff bodice shaped with a narrow waist. Jewels flashed all over this dress, or at least Cinderella supposed them to be jewels, though, on second thoughts, they might be fireflies, butterflies, glowworms. Lastly, this strange lady held in her right hand a short wand, on the end of which trembled a pale, bluish-green flame. And it was this which had first caught Cinderella's eye and caused her to look up. "Good evening, child," said the visitor in a sharp, clear voice, at the same time nodding kindly across the firelight. "You seem to be in trouble. What is the matter?" "I wish," sobbed Cinderella. "I wish," she began again, and again she choked. This was all she could say for weeping. "You wish, dear, that you could go to the ball. Is it not so?" "Yes," said Cinderella with a sigh. "Well then," said the visitor, "be a good girl, dry your tears, and I think it can be managed. I am your godmother, you must know, and in younger days your mother and I were very dear friends." She omitted, perhaps purposely, to add that she was a fairy, but Cinderella was soon to discover this too. "Do you happen to have any pumpkins in the garden?" her godmother asked. Cinderella thought this was an odd question. She could not imagine what pumpkins had to do with going to the ball. But she answered that there were plenty in the garden, a whole bed of them, in fact. "Then let us go out and have a look at them." They went out into the dark garden to the pumpkin patch, and her godmother pointed to the finest of all with her wand. "Pick that one," she commanded. Cinderella picked it, still wondering. Her godmother opened a fruit knife that had a handle of mother of pearl. With this, she scooped out the inside of the fruit till only the rind was left. Then she tapped it with her wand, and at once the pumpkin was changed into a beautiful coach all covered with gold. "Next, we must have horses," said her godmother. "The question is, do you happen to know of a family of mice living in the house?" Cinderella ran to where she knew in her attic bedroom there was a mouse family living. As she lifted a curtain, the mice ran out one by one. The godmother gave each a tap with her wand, and each mouse turned at once into a beautiful horse, which made a fine team of 6 horses of a lovely gray, dappled with mouse color. Now the trouble was to find a coachman and footman. Next she said, go to the end of the garden, and there in the corner of the wall, behind the watering pot, unless I am mistaken, you will find 7 lizards. Bring them to me." Cinderella had no sooner brought them than her godmother changed them into a coachman and 6 footmen, who climbed up at once behind the coach with their bedazzled liveries, and clung on as though they had been doing nothing else all their lives. The fairy then said to Cinderella, "Hey now, child, this will do to go to the ball with, unless you are hard to please." "Indeed, yes," answered Cinderella, "but how can I go, as I am, in these horrid clothes?" "You might have given me credit for thinking of that, too." Her godmother did but touch her with her wand, and on the instant her rags were transformed into cloth of gold and silver, all bespangled with precious stones. She felt her hair creeping into curls, and tiring and arranging itself in tiers, on the topmost of which a double ostrich feather grew from a diamond clasp that caught the rays of the old lady's wand and shot them about the garden, this way and that, making the slugs and snails crawl to shelter. "But the chief mark of a lady," said her godmother, eyeing her with approval, "is to be well shod." And so saying, she pulled out a pair of glass slippers, into which Cinderella poked her toes doubtfully, for glass is not, as a rule, an accommodating material for slippers. You have to be measured very carefully for it. But these fitted to perfection, and thus arrayed from top to toe, Cinderella had nothing more to do but kiss her godmother, thank her, and step into the coach, the 6 horses of which were pawing the cabbage beds impatiently. "Goodbye, child," said her godmother, "but of one thing I must warn you seriously. I have power to send you thus to the ball, but my power lasts only until midnight. Not an instant beyond midnight must you stay there. If you overstay the stroke of 12, your coach will become but a pumpkin again. Your horses will change back into mice, your footmen into lizards, and your ball dress shrink to the same rags in which I found you." Cinderella promised that she would not fail to take her departure before midnight, and with that, the coachman cracked his whip, and she was driven away, beside herself with joy. In the royal palace, and in the gardens, over which shone the same stars which had looked down upon Cinderella's pumpkins, the ball was at its height, with scores and scores of couples dancing on the waxed floor to the music of the violins, and under the trees, where the music throbbed in faint echoes, other scores of couples moving, passing, listening to the plash of the fountains, and inhaling the sweet scent of the flowers. Now, as the king's son walked among his guests, word was brought to him by his chamberlain that a grand princess, whom nobody knew, had just arrived and desired admission. "She will not tell her name," said the chamberlain, "but that she is a princess, and of very high dignity cannot be doubted." The king's son hastened to the gate to receive the fair stranger, handed her down from the coach, and led her through the gardens, where the guests drew apart and gazed in wonder at her loveliness. Still escorted by him, she entered the ballroom, where at once a great silence fell. The dancing was broken off. The violins ceased to play. So taken, so ravished was everybody by the vision of this unknown one. The king's son took her to the place of honor and afterwards led her out to dance. She danced so gracefully that all admired her yet the more. She went and sat by her sisters, who bridled with pleasure at the honor. She did them 1,000 civilities, sharing with them the nectarines and oranges which the prince brought her, and still not recognizing her, they marveled at this. The king's son now claimed her for another dance. It had scarcely come to an end when Cinderella heard the clock strike the 12:15, whereupon she instantly desired her partner to lead her to the king and queen. "For I must be going," she said. "It is cruel of you to go so early," he protested, "but at least you will come again tomorrow and grant me many dances." "Is there to be another ball, then, tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow, yes, and as many morrows as you wish, if only you will come." "Ah, if I could," sighed Cinderella to herself, for she was young, and it seemed to her that she could never have enough of such evenings as this, though they went on for ever and ever. The prince led her to where sat the king and queen. She made a deep reverence before them, a slighter but no less gracious one to the company, and withdrew. Although she had given no orders, her coach stood waiting for her. Slipping in, she was whisked home. She had scarcely entered the house, however, before she received a shock. For on the threshold of the kitchen, glancing down to make sure that her ball gown was not disarranged by this rapid journey, she perceived that it had vanished, changed back to the rags of her daily wear. But there, in the light of the hearth, stood her godmother, who smiled so pleasantly that Cinderella choked down her little cry of disappointment. "Well, child, and how have you fared?" "Godmamma, I had never been so happy in my whole life, and it was all thanks to you." But after thanking her, Cinderella could not help confessing how she longed to go to the ball next evening. The king's son had begged her to come again, and oh, if she had been able to promise. "As to that, child," said her godmother, "we will see about it when the time comes. But it has been lonely, keeping watch and sitting up for you. Will you not reward me by telling all about it?" Cinderella needed no such invitation. She was dying to relate her adventures. She talked and talked, her godmother still smiling and questioning. Almost at once there came a loud ring at the bell. She stared and rubbed her eyes, for at the first sound of it, her godmother had vanished. Cinderella ran and opened the door to her sisters. "What a long time you have stayed," said she, yawning, rubbing her eyes, and stretching herself as though she had just awoken from sleep. If you had been at the ball, said the elder sister, you would not have felt tired. One of the guests was the loveliest princess. Oh, the loveliest princess ever you would see. She showed us 1,000 civilities. She gave us nectarines and oranges. Cinderella contained her joy. Upstairs, while she unbraided her sister's hair and unlaced their bodices, she asked the name of the princess. But they answered that no one knew her, and that the king's son was wild about her, and would give everything in the world to discover who she was. Cinderella smiled. Why then, she said, she must be beautiful indeed. And she went away, you say, without telling her name? Is no one going to see her again? As for that, she may come again to the ball tomorrow. I am told the prince begged it, almost with tears in his eyes. For there is to be another ball tomorrow, and we are going. Ah, heavens, sighed Cinderella. How lucky you are. Might I not just see her? Please, please, Sister Caroline, take me tomorrow. I could manage quite well if only you lent me your yellow gown, which you wear every evening. Hoity-toity, snapped Miss Caroline. You cannot be awake. You must have been dreaming to some purpose if you see me lending my clothes to a nasty little Cinderella. The next evening, the two sisters were at the ball, and so was Cinderella, but in even finer attire than before. Her godmother had spared no pains, and, as for the expense, that hardly needs to be considered when you can turn pumpkins into gilt coaches, cobwebs into lace, and beetles' wings into rubies with the tap of a wand. The king's son, in his impatience, flew to her coach door as soon as she arrived. Throughout the evening he never left her side, nor ceased to make pretty speeches, and she, pretty maid, was far from finding his behavior tiresome. So far, indeed, that she forgot her godmother's warning. The end was that in the midst of the dance she heard the stroke of the clock, looked up, was dismayed to find it the first stroke of 12, when she believed it yet an hour short of midnight, and made her escape as lightly as a deer. The prince followed, but could not catch her. Only she dropped one of her glass slippers, which he picked up and treasured. With the last stroke of 12, coach and footman had whisked away, and poor Cinderella, barefoot now as well as in rags, panted homeward over roads where the owls and great moths blundered out of the bushes against her face. To make matters worse, a thunderstorm broke before she had ran half the distance, and she arrived home in a plight, muddy, drenched to the skin. In one thing only she was fortunate. She had outstripped her sisters, whose coach on the way home lost a wheel, and I have a suspicion that Cinderella's godmother had something to do with this misadventure too. At all events, when Cinderella opened the kitchen door, the little lady stood as she had stood the night before, in the glow of the hearth, awaiting her. "Well, child," she said, frowning, yet the frown was not altogether unkindly. "It is easily seen that you have forgotten my warning and have suffered for it. But what is it that you are clutching?" Poor Cinderella drew from under her bedraggled bodice a crystal slipper, fellow to the missing one. It was the one remnant of all her finery, and somehow, scarcely knowing why, she had hugged it to her while she ran, and never let it slip in all her stumblings. Her godmother gazed at her with a strange expression that began by being a frown, yet in the end had certainly changed into a shrewd smile. "You have been careless," she said, "yet I am pleased to see that you have managed to keep, at any rate, one half of your godmother's gift." "But what has become of the other one?" her godmother asked. Cinderella did not know for certain, but fancied that she must have dropped it in her hurry to escape from the palace. "Yes, you are careless," repeated the fairy, "but decidedly you are not unlucky." And with that she vanished as the bell sounded announcing the sisters' return. They were not in the best of humors to begin with. Cinderella asked them if they had again found the ball enjoyable, and if the beautiful lady had been there. They told her yes, but that on the stroke of 12 she had taken flight, and so hurriedly had she left that she let fall one of her small glass slippers, the prettiest in the world, which the king's son had picked up. They added that this indeed was the first cause of their delay, for, seeking their carriage, they had found the entry blocked, and the prince in the wildest state of mind, demanding of the guards if they had not seen a princess pass out. The guards answered that they had seen no one pass out but a ragged girl, who looked more like a country wench than a princess. A few days later, the king's son had it proclaimed by sound of trumpet that he would marry her whose foot the slipper exactly fitted. At first they tried it on the princesses of the court, then on the duchesses and baronesses, countesses, and so on, through all the ladies of the court, who, though they did not belong to it, yet supposed that the smallness of their feet was an argument that their parents had very unjustly come down in the world. The prime minister, who carried the glass slipper on a velvet cushion, was kept very busy during the next few weeks. At length, he called upon Cinderella's two sisters, who did all they could to squeeze a foot into the slipper, but by no means could they succeed. Cinderella, who was looking on and admiring their efforts, said laughingly, "Let me see if it will fit me." Her sisters began to laugh and mock at her, but the prime minister, who had come to make trial of the slipper, looked at Cinderella attentively, said that it was but just. He had orders to try it upon everyone. He asked Cinderella to sit down, and, drawing the slipper upon her little foot, he saw that it went on easily and fitted the foot like wax. Great was the astonishment of the two sisters, but it was greater when Cinderella pulled from her pocket the other little slipper and put it upon the other foot. On top of this came a rap at the door, and in walked the fairy godmother, who, by a touch of her wand upon Cinderella's clothes, made them still more magnificent than they had been before. And now her two sisters knew Cinderella to be the same beautiful creature they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet, begging her pardon for all the ill usage they had made her suffer. Cinderella raised and kissed them, saying that she forgave them with all her heart, and entreated them to be loving to her always. They led her to the young prince, arrayed as she was. He thought her lovelier than ever, and a few days after, they were married. Cinderella, who was as good as she was beautiful, lodged her two sisters in the palace and married them that same day to two great lords of the court.